Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. We're going to get started in just a moment here. My name is Dr. Sherry Popp with Weave Education, and thank you for joining us today. While we're waiting for participants to continue joining the webinar, we'll go over just a couple housekeeping items. We are recording our session today. We're happy to share that with the registered participants, so you'll receive an email after we wrap up today. And also this webinar will be in our Knowledge Center for you to download and share later on. We'll be using the chat and the Q&A for a lot of interaction today, so please feel free to put your comments there. And as a matter of fact, our presenters would love to know who's joining us today. So if you want to just jump in the chat and let us know the name of your institution and what role you have in the assessment world there, that would be great. Kind of helps us understand who's in the room. And finally, your feedback shapes what we do here at Weave. And so if you will take the time at the close of the webinar just to fill out a quick survey that'll take 2 or 3 minutes, we always appreciate that, and that shapes what we do for the future. So without further ado, I would like to get started and introduce to you our guests for today. We are joined by Iowa Central Community College and Dr. Stacy Menser, who's the Vice President of Instruction. Her path to this position began as a medical lab tech and grew to the coordinator of the Medical Lab Technician AAS, and from there to her work in institutional effectiveness as she worked on her PhD. Her experience with program curriculum, accreditation, and enrollment prepared her for her role as Vice President of Instruction. She was part of the assessment committee when Iowa Central Community College started their Open Pathways Quality Initiative in the Higher Learning Commission's Assessment Academy in 2014. And so for those of you who are joining us from the Higher Learning Commission region, they'll be providing some more information about that today. Jennifer Condon is also with us today. She began her career at Iowa Central in 1995, and she's moved up through the organization from a part-time tutor to English faculty to liberal arts dean. In those roles, she has been part of strategic planning, assessment, and instructional council. She was also part of the assessment committee and the HLC Academy team with Dr. Menser. And I added this myself, but I'd like to say, and the rest, as they say, is history. These two have a lot of energy and a lot of great tips that they're going to share with us today, and we're excited to hear from them. So with that, I will hand it over to Stacy and Jennifer. And again, if you're just joining us, go ahead and put in the chat your name and the institution you're with and the role that you have at your institution, and we will be sending out the recording after the webinar today.
Hey, thank you, Sherry. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. As Sherry said, I am Dr. Stacy Menser, the Vice President of Instruction at Iowa Central Community College, and I'm joined by the Dean of Liberal Arts, Jennifer Condon. We have been part of the big assessment projects at Iowa Central for multiple years. I think we'll go there and leave it with that. So we only found it fitting to name our webinar today, Strategies for Buy-In. It's not the pain in the assessment. So Sherry, if you could hit to the next slide for me, that would be great. Okay, so the outcomes from our presentation today are pretty simple. The first one, we'll be offering professional development activities for targeted assessments, onboarding employees into the assessment processes, and building buy-in through collaboration and participation. If I had to pick one of these three, I would say that third one is probably the most important and maybe one of the most challenging things that Jennifer and I have probably encountered throughout this process. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the history of assessment at Iowa Central Community College, the history is very long. Assessment is something that we do every day, whether we know it or not. For 30 years, well over 30 years, we've had some form of documentation from the Higher Learning Commission and also the Iowa Department of Education on our lack of information in regard to assessment. Now, the thing about this is that we all know we were doing assessments. We were doing assessments in the classrooms. We were doing assessments in our co-curriculars and our extracurriculars in our business office. But what we really finally figured out was that there was really a lack of understanding as to what assessment was. We really were missing that streamlined process and what the Higher Learning Commission likes to call closing the loop. And so over the past 30 years, we have struggled. We've done the follow-up reports, we've been through the accreditation visits, and we were just never able to really get that kind of that check clean bill of health in terms of assessment. And so part of our process that we'll talk about today is how we got off of that, we like to call it the naughty list, and finally moved our college forward and really started closing the loop and streamlining our process and really getting buy-in across the entire campus. Next slide, Sherry.
So Dr. Menser is absolutely correct in that building this buy-in does take a lot out of you some days. And we spend a lot of time trying to strategize and figure out ways to educate ourselves and our colleagues, to bring people together from different areas who normally would not collaborate, to get people to talk about assessment and get them off of the idea that assessment must be a quiz in a classroom on a Tuesday at 9 o'clock in the morning. So when we say pain in the assessment, it really is about, it's not a pain and you did it yesterday because it changed what you did today, or it changes what's going in the catalog for next year because we found a definition that wasn't clear enough for everybody. And documenting that and getting everybody together going forward, it just takes time. It takes passion for that, interest in that buy-in. And you have to start over almost all the time. So we don't get the luxury of saying, yes, we have buy-in and we don't have to worry about that next year because you have new employees, you have new people in new positions. So our best example of building a dynamic team is from our assessment academy that we were part of starting in 2014. And on that academy, coincidentally, Dr. Menser was not Dr. Menser at the time, but she was represented on there as our institutional effectiveness executive director. We wanted her on the team so that we knew we could get information and where was information. And so we brought her into that capacity. I was in my current position. I don't remember if I was liberal arts or arts and sciences at that time, but it shifted a little bit, but I was still in my same relative position. One of our colleagues, Justin Robertson, joined the Assessment Academy as a faculty member. And now he's the Associate Dean of Liberal Arts. We had several faculty from health sciences, math. We really brought together this diverse group because we knew we were in serious hot water with assessment, and we really wanted people who wanted to learn and wanted to move forward, and that dynamic team was really key for that Assessment Academy. And that team was charged over the next 4 years, no change in staffing unless somebody left the college for a different position. We really spent a lot of time together. We would spend all day workshops. We traveled out to the Chicagoland area. We stayed at a resort, if you will. We stayed downtown and wandered through some federal buildings periodically. We spent a lot of time together working on all the information we need. We had to reinforce our own passion for what we were doing. We had to find the good fits for what we needed to accomplish. We had to be really honest with ourselves about these are our weaknesses. Some people have been here 15 years and they still think it's a quiz on Tuesday. So, we really had to kind of cut away at all the layers in there and find what is the most direct way that we can be very transparent with anybody, whether it's the Iowa Department of Education, the governor of Iowa, a legislature, the HLC, an advisory board. How can we demonstrate and collect and get on that same page with assessment? And that means bringing everybody in. You have to update the college president. You need to spend a lot of time with those people and repeating what is it so that they're not scared of assessment or intimidated by what they think their data collection is going to be. And taking the time to do that at your own institution, if you are able to do so, is really critical in carrying through that passion into the rest of your activities. Next slide, Sherry.
So we put a little break here early on in the session just for some questions from the audience, if you have any. Whether you're in that HLC region or from another region, there might be some questions about what the Assessment Academy entails. And you got a little description there about traveling with a team in Chicago and those kinds of things. But we might have some other questions from the audience. So we'll give a minute for folks to think and maybe pop those questions in the chat or in the Q&A. And while folks are thinking, I just have a question of my own. So thinking in terms of the HLC Academy, which I've heard so many great things about, there are a lot of smaller institutions that maybe don't have the funds to participate in that. Or we'll have institutions on this call from different regions. So are there some parts of that you think that folks could replicate on their campus, even if they can't join the HLC Academy?
Yeah, so I think the thing about the Academy for us was, it was that constant. It was the constant trips to Chicago, number one, but even if you can't make the trips, it was that scheduled time for us to be together uninterrupted. It was the constant, oh, these questions are due, because when you are in the Academy, you have a liaison that works with you throughout the Assessment Academy, and they constantly, I do believe it was every 3 months, Jennifer, that we had questions that we had to fill out and we had to answer, and we had to tell about our progress and maybe areas that we were struggling, anything that we were changing. And so it was that, I don't want to use the word hounding, but I'm going to use the word, it was the constant hounding and the accountability, really, that I think was really good for us, because it is challenging. Anybody that works in higher ed knows it is challenging to schedule time away where you're not interrupted by anything else, and that you just focus on that one project. And so I really think that was key for us. And I don't know if Jennifer maybe has a different idea, but for me, that was kind of the big thing that you could really replicate. And honestly, I have a group of 4 deans and an associate dean now. And we do our best work when I say, okay, grab your computers, load up your work. We are going off campus for a day. Don't get on your phones and don't check your email. And we're getting work done. And so I still use that strategy now.
Great.
Dr. Menser is right. Just being able to isolate yourselves in a positive environment with energy and resources, and throw ideas on giant Post-it notes or little Post-it notes, and really kind of hash through some of those key things. And it gives you a chance to really get on that same page and know how to take that information back and make sure everybody's at the same comfort level. And that quarterly report was really key, because it's easy to forget that you're doing this, and then the reminder comes out, and they're very reflective journal types of questions. I see one of the questions in the chat now is a major challenge. And that was always one of our questions quarterly. What's your challenge this time? Our challenge has been technology. We've dealt with collection of information and trying to explain, like, this is what your collection looks like. We are challenged by employees who don't know that they have their own assessments when you talk about operational performance goals. Now our assessment team has an athletic coach on there. And so that we're like, well, you assess your practice every day, co-curricular, trying to define that and help people understand what that is, and not make it just one more thing to do. To emphasize that you're doing what you already do. We're just asking you to journal about it and write about it, so we have evidence and can go back in time and monitor progress on your goal. So I think it's really just, I don't know if I caught all the major challenges, but it just comes at you every time. And when you think you got something really good, then the next challenge kind of surfaces, because now we need a video to demonstrate logging into Weave, and stay current there. So lucky for us, we have a lot of people on our team that have taught in higher ed or elsewhere. And so we really approach it like, how do I get this clear in my classroom? So we have instructional videos, handouts, We have large group sessions. We randomly group people. Oh, I'm probably jumping a little too far ahead here, but
Yeah, hang on.
sorry.
That's okay. That's just, it reminds me of something that we're experiencing here at Weave as we're working through some curriculum for Weave Academy. And it just seems like every time we get one thing ironed out, it reveals 2 or 3 more things that need our attention. It's like this thread that you pull and reveals so many other things. And I think a lot of assessment work is that way. So I hear what you're saying. It's like hard to identify major challenges because every challenge that you address kind of highlights the need to continue to improve. So, thank you for answering that question and for the tips about setting aside time, because I think that that's key for every part of this assessment process. I often say at the program level that program faculty, if it's not built into your cycle for them to sit down and roll up their sleeves and get in with the data and kind of get dirty with the data and examine it, they won't just make the time for that on their own. It has to be baked into the cycle. And so at this larger institutional level, the same stands. We do have another question in the Q&A. Alice Jenkins asks, what level are you speaking to? Institutional, gen ed, program student learning outcomes, course, etc. So I'll let either one of you field that question, and then we'll see what else pops up in the chat before we move on.
All of the above. Our assessment project is big. It is big. The number one comment that we got from the HLC throughout the entire assessment academy was, you need to slow down. Jennifer and I are really good at getting our heads together and we just go. And so it was great to have somebody say, whoa, that's great, but slow down. But as we move through the assessment project, we are assessing everything campus-wide. And I can say that with certainty and excitement, because it has taken us a long time to get there, but we are assessing at every level right now. And we'll talk about here just in a little bit about how we got that to happen, because it was not easy. That's for sure.
And Irina, I think we'll kind of get to some strategies that might answer your question about resistant faculty. Mm-hmm. And if you don't think we answer that well, we can come back to that question at the end again.
Okay, thank you. And that's kind of like the evergreen question, isn't it? So I'm glad you're going to address that. I don't think we can ever have too many different strategies and ways to try that. So, so thanks for those questions. And I think we're ready to move on then.
Irina does have one more in the Q&A. How big is the assessment office?
Oh, okay.
The answer is 0. There is no office. It is all people in different roles. So yeah.
We literally have an assessment team that is myself, Dean Condon, who I just retired from that team and had another dean step in her place. But there are about 8 to 10 of us that do all of this. So.
And no, there is no compensation, and no, there is no release time.
No.
We don't have those solutions for you.
Right. Although those questions are very fitting coming into the next slide on total buy-in. And so how do we balance the workload? Honestly, I put it on my calendar and it is challenging. The Assessment Academy made that easier for us because we had to go, we had to do it. And it just, assessment needed to be a priority for us. All joking aside, we were about to get in some serious trouble. And so it had to become a priority. And so being in institutional effectiveness, I knew this coming into the vice president of instruction, it gave me a little more pull to make that happen. And so it was a challenge, but we just knew it had to be done. So we had to make the time for it. That's just the honest answer. It's not fun or great, just honest. But part of making all of this happen was really getting that total buy-in from everybody. And so when we talk about what total buy-in looks like, I'll go big picture for a second and tell you that we have people from every area of our campus, and I'm going to say campuses, right? Because we have our main campus. We have two other centers that are in different towns. We have 4 career academies. And so we are very spread out over probably close to 200 miles, I would say, from one to the other. And so I'm happy to say that we've got everybody in there. We have our facilities workers in there, and some of these individuals, you know, struggle with the computer. Our business office is in there, financial aid, our advising center, our faculty, our adjunct faculty. We have face-to-face classes, but we also have a very strong online component at Iowa Central. Those adjunct faculty are also required to do assessment of student learning in their courses. And so we started small. We started with our full-time faculty, and we just kind of built as time went on. Every semester, we just added another component. But when we first started this entire project, we knew we had a big step in front of us, a big task, so to speak. Assessment was not new. We had tried to tackle this in other ways before, and we just were not as successful as people thought we should be. And so when we started this assessment project, we really took about 12 steps back, and we really went back to the basics. We held workshops during work days that were all day long. They were mandatory. We started out with programming course outcomes. Okay, everybody pull your outcomes, look at them. Do they need to be changed? Are they measurable? We did the same thing with objectives. We've now done the same thing with departments. And so we went back, we looked at those, we made sure that we had outcomes that made sense. We had outcomes that made sure that our outcomes matched our course descriptions, and that we were really trying to measure exactly what was going on in our classes and what needed to occur in our classes. It really just was starting from the beginning. It was almost like we were a new college, right? We're going to offer all of these classes. Hey, here's your course description. How do you make sure that you can show that your students are learning everything you say they are? Because when it comes to assessment and to any accreditation, I'm fairly certain it's all about the evidence that you provide, right? You can't just say you're doing it. And so one of these things that we did was, as we started, I'll remember our first workshop because I was so frustrated. We were talking about course outcomes. And the number of different definitions that our faculty had for what an outcome was mind-boggling to me. The number of different definitions or what people thought an objective was. We had people that had them flipped around. And so at that point we realized, okay, hang on a second. So we came up with common definitions that for our next meeting, we were ready to go. Here are the definitions of these terms that our college is going to use moving forward. There's no questions about them. This is the definitions, right? And so we did that. We also then started implementing things onto our website so people had common resources, and we'll talk more about that later, but our definitions are there. So we wanted people to be able to have access to this stuff at all times. But part of those common definitions was an equal understanding, right? Our objectives, that's how we show, make sure the steps that we take to get our students to the outcomes for the course that we've identified in the course description. And so we really phased it out and really worked hard to make sure that we all had that equal understanding. Jennifer mentioned before, just assessment, right? The lack of understanding of how in-depth the word assessment really is. It's not a test. It's not just a quiz. I'm assessing people that are walking across campus. Are they walking really fast? Are they looking at a funny building? You know, are they looking at trash that's on the sidewalk? That's all an assessment. Am I assessing the weeds in the flower bed? You know, as I walk across campus, all of those things. And so trying to get the group to understand that really assessment was occurring, whether you thought it was or not. And it wasn't just that quiz on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. And so by doing that and getting everybody on the same page, I'm going to say that took us close to a year. I felt like that first year we were never going to get anywhere and not going to get anything done. But looking back at all of it, I think that was kind of the key to our success, was making sure that we all had the same knowledge and the same information that we could all build together from there. Next slide, Sherry.
So Dr. Menser mentioned this first year for the assessment academy that we had, and that we had to slow down, and our team was very eager. I felt like when we came back from that first meeting, we had it all planned out and we were going to be done by December kind of a thing. And we wanted to talk about technology, and they're like, don't worry about technology. And we're like, yeah, but collecting information is hard, and format, and where is it, and different things. But slowing down was very critical, and remembering that you have to actually come back to it full circle, not in 10 years, but probably in 4 or 5, just between turnover and people are in different places and understanding. So I'm just going to talk through a few of the workshops and trainings that we have done. It might give you some ideas. I saw a question about what kind of support did you have from the president's office. If our assessment team wanted a 2-hour block of time on a faculty workday or on a Friday, and we wanted cookies, we could ask for the space. We could just reserve it. We could get the cookies. We had buy-in from other supervisors to get people together. We recognized some people could not abandon a workspace and couldn't all come over. We knew some faculty had classes, and sometimes we're like, but this is important too. We knew coaches had practice, and we're like, but this is important too. And luckily, I don't think we were ever told no whenever we wanted time or requested all staff types of meetings with information. We could be on the president's welcome back agenda at the start of a fall semester, and we could talk about what was coming up. Originally, people on campus thought Weave was just for faculty. I don't teach. We're like, but you affect student learning. And Weave is just a way to collect information and be able just to collect it consistency. So our workshops, one of our goals was always what would be a good assessment of our workshop. So we would try to model assessments. We did muddiest points. We did tickets out the door. We would do survey kind of fun interactive things sometimes. We were insistent that groups in our workshops were randomized. We did not want all of the math faculty to sit together or all the nursing faculty to sit together. They can talk about assessment in their own department meetings. We wanted to educate ourselves to know what was going on over in the simulation center that might give the HVAC instructor a chance to think, oh, I could ask them to simulate a bad customer, and I could evaluate the HVAC technician going in and trying to explain what was going on with the air conditioning unit. That we had resources and assessments that you don't think about if you kind of stay in your classroom or stay in your lab. We thought it was very important that we even shared what's going on. Like, wow, I didn't know nursing did that. I didn't know that the photography program would come over and help us do fire science related investigation photographs. When we talk together, we learn about each other. We learn about our college and can place students better. But when you get to talk about what you're assessing, that means you understand it better yourself. You can teach somebody to do math, but you can't teach it until you understand it really well. And just any kinds of workshops, our assessment team would offer drop-in days. We're like, you know what, I'll go upstairs and I'll be in a classroom at 3 o'clock on a Friday. And anybody that wants to come over, I'll be there to help. Or Justin will be there to help, or Stacy. We knew we had to be there to help. We take phone calls from different departments, different areas, because assessment is generic. We allowed them to build their own templates in Weave. In a little bit, we'll talk about our co-curricular assessment, and we'll explain that a team of co-curricular people came up with what the tool would be to assess that. Our team didn't tell them what it had to be. They're in the trenches and they're doing those. What do you want to know about bingo night? What do you want to know about the holiday concert? What is an evaluation of it? How do you assess that it worked or didn't work? Was worth our financial resources or wasn't? I am going to pop in, before I forget, I have a link for you. I'll pop it in the chat. kind of to our planning page where we have some of our resources. Again, the assessment team is all about how can we help people, because we're not going to answer the phone at midnight. We might check email, but we won't answer the phone. And so we all share resources. If we can explain it and create a quick video for something, then let's do that. If the handout can be improved, let's do that for ourselves. And oh man, I get phone calls from everywhere. Justin, he actually, I think, is on. I think I saw him log in a little bit earlier, but he's down the hall from me, and he answers questions about Weave from high school concurrent enrollment instructors. Because we have a communications department who's collecting some NASEP information through Weave, because it's a place for us to log in and submit information. So we're using even this product, and I know this is a Weave session, but getting people aware that Weave is just a tool for us to collect information in a consistent way and make it very reflective in that nature, the whole essence of assessment. I don't know that I've ever not felt supported in assessment, except for people who are frustrated. That was asked, how do you deal with resistant faculty or resistant coaches or athletic directors or facilities or custodians? It's that why. What are they doing? And making them aware that you're doing it. We're just asking you to communicate what you're doing. And can you communicate in a way that makes sense to anybody outside of your area, to reinforce that your assessment of that cleaning schedule, that priority practice, how it works with class schedules, that we just have some information that we can follow up with and we can track and monitor over time and make improvements. Helps us identify those weak spots. But you got to spend a lot of time with those people and not be scared if they feel threatened, because sometimes I think they're just scared to be wrong. And aren't we all? Nobody wants to be wrong, right? We do focus on some of our assessments of student learning. They have to be things that aren't working well, so that everybody is talking about something that's not working well and might get a really good idea. If you just submit all the stuff that's working great, it's hard to show improvement on that kind of piece. So I think I've addressed some of the questions, but I know Dr. Menser and I are going to kind of go back and forth on this next slide a little bit and give you some more concrete examples.
Okay, so we both have talked a little bit about assessment of student learning at every level. And on this slide, this is just different examples of groups that we have on our campus. So operational performance is something that I know a number of people are not aware of. And this is all of our functional, or what I call our functional areas. So our business office, financial aid, advising, admissions. It's really about the student services side of things. And we need to assess student learning in those places as well on our campus. And so what we did to start that was I sat down with this group and I talked to them and taught them about learning outcomes and objectives. And so now every year, every student services area of our college develops goals that they have for their area for the year, and they identify the objectives. And they're building those in Weave. And we have had some phenomenal things come out of this. We've had changes to the billing options for our students. We've had changes to the way financial aid is doing paperwork for our students. Lots of great things. Our program review process for our internal program reviews is used now as well, and we do it in Weave. So 10 years ago, we actually had a comment about our program review process from an accrediting body that was just not awesome. But what was more not awesome, if you can say it that way, was that some of our staff actually sat in that meeting and said, oh, this process is awful and it's so hard and it's complex. And that's the worst thing to hear, especially when you're doing an accreditation interview. And so as we worked through the assessment project, we actually pulled program review into that as well and pulled that into Weave. This process is so seamless now. We just had both our 10-year HLC accreditation and our 10-year Iowa Department of Education, and both had raving reviews on our program review process, and the fact that we had it in Weave was kind of our, again, it's our tool. It's our tool for everything that we do assessment now. And all of our program coordinators absolutely love it. And so that's huge for us, just having that tool to pull all those things in and simplifying the process has been a big part. Enrollment management is another one that we use. This is reports that every area of the college, every academic program, every athletic team, I do believe our different groups on campus do them as well. And this is all about recruitment and retention. So the outcomes there are looking at what their recruitment goals are, what their retention goals are. Again, it's all right in Weave. They're assessing it, they're going in, they're putting their evidence in, and then they're looking back, making changes for the next year, what worked, what didn't work. Jennifer, any of those that you want to talk about specifically or give examples of?
Well, I mentioned earlier for the co-curricular assessment template that we came up with Weave, we pulled together a variety of people who dealt with co-curricular activities. We were very clear on what that definition was, what our purpose was, why would you assess it? Oh, wait, you already are, because why are you doing it again, right? So we let them determine for themselves, what do we need to write about? What do we need to collect? What's the question we want to ask that will help us ensure that we should continue the activity or stop the activity and find something new? Lucky for us, in a way, COVID and all our shutdown, we really had to reevaluate co-curricular. You had to go to virtual bingo. You couldn't have the student activity on campus. We found out that we're, not as involved with our online students or our concurrent enrollment students as we are on campus. And just giving them a chance to write about it and collect that information kind of opened up some doors and opportunities. Nobody was judging if there was bingo night or what's the one we always talk about, the hypnotist, right?
Yes.
Like, why is there a hypnotist, what is the value in there, and how do you, justify in a way that it's a good thing? How many students show up? How many non-traditional students bring in their children to our cookout? Just lots of things. Again, it was happening. Now we have in a place that we can share that news and we can, again, improve what we have going on. Departments, deans, anybody can create a special project. If there's something specific going on and you just want to collect information, it just keeps it from getting lost in a shuffle. It keeps it from going on a networked folder or a drive here, a OneDrive folder. It's just always in there, and we have an admin account that we can kind of pull special projects from if we need examples for evidence. Dr. Menser does not have to call anybody and ask for an assessment of student learning. She can just pull them randomly, and we can just pull them if they affect personal responsibility. And it can pull in a co-curricular and a program review. It can pull all of those things in so seamlessly. It's just nice to have it in one place. I'm trying to think. I don't know about shared governance necessarily having something in Weave, but I think eventually some of those will move into special projects going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Sherry, you can go to the next slide if you want.
So I was going to mention while we're on here, just before we go to that next slide, there were a couple of questions in the Q&A that I think you kind of touched on, but I'll throw them out and see if there's any clarification you want to provide. So Allison asked about she said they're in the HLC Academy too, and they're running into resistance from those non-curricular areas, thinking that they don't have learning outcomes. And so maybe you could give an example of an outcome that one of your non-curricular areas or your co-curricular areas assessed very specifically to kind of help answer that question. I think you did a little bit, but anything you want to add to that?
So I'll remind you that good for you for joining the Academy. It will be a game changer for you, and it will be painful, but it is so worth it in the end. I ran into that as well. And so the example that I actually gave not too long ago to a coach was, what's your goal for the year? Do you want to win another national title? Do you want to not win a title? What's your goal? right? What is the outcome that you want your students to have? So how do you reach that goal? What activities do you have your students do? So if you want your team to your 4x1, I'm not an athletic person, so you got to work with me here. I'm academics.
You're faking it really well.
You have a relay team that's going to do a 4x100 and they want to set a new record. What are the individual activities that you're going to do with them that are going to lead up to them meeting that goal, right? That's your outcome, and those are your objectives, and your outcome is really just your big goal. That's really how we got it through with our coaching staff. That's what that was about. Because if you don't have a goal for your students, then why do we have your team? And that is the question that I find myself asking people a lot. If you don't have a goal, then what are you doing? I mean, I assure that it's fun, but then that's your goal for fun. And how are you going to make sure that your kids have fun, right? I mean, I don't know as though that really ties in with our mission and vision, but, as an example. So I don't know if that is helpful or not, but that is one that I've used quite a bit is, if you want your team to win a national title, what are the things that you're going to do differently this year? Maybe to make sure that they reach that national title that you didn't do last year, or, something along those lines.
I appreciate that example that you gave. And what I want to really grab onto there is that comment about, so if you don't think that you're impacting student learning, then what's your role here at our institution? And I think that's a fair question for any department, academic or non-academic. And I think that might really raise the level of involvement of those non-academic departments who sometimes think well, we don't really impact student learning, just to challenge them to kind of think in those terms a little bit. So thanks for answering that. And I think that we also already addressed, Linda Zhang said, does your office do assessment for non-academic units? And you talked about enrollment and management. So I think that we got that one. And so we'll move on here. And then there are a couple of other questions lingering out there, but maybe we can catch those at the end.
Okay. So through all of this, if I can say anything, I can say that this process was a complete success. I've said it 100 times to my team, but I have a dynamic team who truly cares about assessment. In the end, we do have a streamlined process. Again, for those of you going through it, maybe just starting it, thinking about it, it was not easy. There were plenty of times that you want to bang your head against the wall or, say, forget it, I'm done with assessment. I think the thing, maybe the one catch where we got was when the HLC said, oh, but how are you closing the loop? And I really at that point thought, you've got to be kidding me right now. And as I looked at it and I thought, you're right? Here's all of our evidence. We're assessing student learning. Okay, what are we doing with it, right? What are we doing with all of these assessments? Yep, we're doing them, check it off the box, right? But how are we really closing the loop? How are we taking what we've learned and then really working to improve our student learning? And that's been our focus this year. We are also now starting to tie in different pieces of our budget, which has been more challenging than I thought it would be, but we're getting there. It's just one step at a time. Like Jennifer said, it's really all about the support mechanism. I know I saw a question pop up and I didn't get it answered, but somebody had said, how did we transition during COVID? We did Zoom. 7 o'clock at night, I was at my kitchen counter on Zoom. We were weaving. It's just what we did. And I can tell you that during COVID, what I learned was at 7 o'clock at night, I have an amazing audience. I can hold any meeting via Zoom from in my sweatpants at home, and I will get the biggest, most attentive audience that I've ever had. I would highly recommend anybody do that because it's phenomenal. But we have a better understanding campus-wide about assessment. I truly feel like we can say we have a culture of assessment at our college after all of these years. We do have new people. We do have to remind ourselves to slow down and to take a step back. Start at the beginning, not quite as slow, but to get people up to pace. We do have new people coming in. It seems like all the time some months. So, it's all about just really keeping on track with that. I put excitement with a question mark on this slide because I'm hopeful that people are really excited about assessment. And I really think that we are. We don't get the groaning. We don't get the million questions when we hold these big activities. We do have buy-in from the lead administrative team, which is huge. And so that has really, really been helpful. But when push comes to shove and all of the blood, sweat, and tears, literally, we had 2 totally clear accreditations, 10 years, Higher Learning Commission, and the Iowa Department of Education in the last 6 months. And that just made it all worth it. No follow-up reports for either accrediting body. And for anybody that deals with accreditation, you know that that's just a win. So now I'm really excited because I'm the one who does those reports. So you could probably take the question mark off of that word. So, okay, now I think we are ready for questions. Are there any more we didn't answer?
So I think we do have a couple of more questions. One of them is, so Amy asks, and this is a really very specific question that I don't know that we can help her, navigate the requirements of the state of Ohio, but their courses have to be transfer assurance guidelines certified. And so they can't change course learning outcomes. So what should we do about poorly worded outcomes that they don't have any control over? So I don't know that we can address specifically the woes of the state of Ohio, but maybe just some general advice in that area.
We have a couple of examples like that. They're either tied to accrediting bodies or to standard curriculum for transfer. And so we just told those faculty, you don't have to edit if it's required. We get that. You know, it doesn't necessarily reflect poor on you, but maybe notate that very clearly in your course syllabi, or a program handbook or something. We know that sometimes we're given things that we have to do. We could ask if they have some flexibility to clarify the objective level, or maybe even just have another section where, you know, you can clarify those assessments in a section of assessment or something in the course syllabus. So we do ask our faculty to notate when it is standard and non-editable, if you will. Just so that's also clear from the outside, like, why does this one look different than the rest? We had faculty who chose not to reduce their student learning outcomes in their courses, like that had 25. And our team was like, hey, we don't recommend 25. Have you thought about 5 to 7? You know, can you clump them and think of really what the big idea is? And some faculty, when we talked about resistant, they just left it as is. And then when we first went through Weave and they had to map every single one of those to their department outcomes, their program outcomes, the learning outcomes, and HLC criteria. Finally, they'd walk into my office and they go, oh, you know, you told us not to have 25. We're like, yeah, we did. But you can have 25. It's fine. We're not judging how many you have. But if you have 25, what would that evidence look like from an outsider? What if somebody came in and said, show me the money? What if your students ask that, or a parent who's paying tuition? So sometimes you got to kind of let them hang on to their old school learning. And then when they realize, oh, this is where we're going and that makes sense. I think that sometimes you just got to let them hang on to their old way, and then, you know, you just keep bringing them in. You can outlast anybody.
There's a good little nugget of advice to take away, right? Just hang on and outlast them. But I do appreciate that idea that, you know, really, as we move forward in time with accreditors and their expectations of what we're doing with our assessment data, it's really that we're using that data that we are collecting. So I think the language of the outcomes is really significant, but then whether the outcome is worded in just the precise way or not, the evidence that's collected from that should still be usable. And so maybe that's an encouragement to some folks who have some kind of unwieldy outcomes or ones that aren't worded just the way that they would like. You can still make use of the data that you collect from that if you've chosen a good measure and collected good evidence. So we have another question here. So I'm kind of going back and forth between chat and Q&A. And thanks to everyone who's popping those questions in there, because it's really good, rich discussion here. Is do you keep assessment of SLOs separate from performance reviews? And of course, that's a common worry, Alice says, and we all know that faculty are concerned that negative results of SLOs will be used against them. So how do you address that?
So the one thing that I always tell my faculty is that I'm not assessing your assessments. Who am I to assess if you have a good assessment in your carpentry program? I don't know anything about carpentry. I just need to know that you're doing it. You're doing it to the best of your ability, and that you're ensuring that your students are learning and you're making changes because of it. We are not going in and critiquing assessments. We just started a peer review process this semester, so I'm excited to see. We don't have any outcomes on that yet. It's not quite due yet, but we do not put them in with that process at all. No, this is just matter. It does go in on your review. Do you have your weave done?
Right.
You know, because
Yeah.
that's the level that our college is at. You know, the expectation is that you get it done, and so that question is asked and it is looked at by the deans when they do evaluations. But otherwise, that's it.
Yeah, but it's not looking at the content of it. It's,
No.
you know, did you submit what you needed to submit? And then tell me about it, kind of a conversation, or what your department got going on with that. So.
Good. So we have another question here that says, and I think it was when you were talking about their syllabi, is there an assessment section actually on the syllabus? And I think that's a great question I can answer from my own experience, but I'll let you all field that one first.
So we do have, if there's common assessments amongst the course. So I always think of Composition 1. They have a common assessment across all sections of that course throughout the college, no matter where it's taught, who teaches it. There are common assessments, and so those are in the syllabi. There are not assessments in every syllabi. There's an assessment section, but we encourage it for those that have common assessments.
That's great. I had quite a few faculty on my campus who got in the habit of including on their syllabus a section that showed how assessments that were used in the course connected to the outcomes for that course and to the program outcomes. And in some cases that is required, for instance, for teacher preparation in the state of Iowa, that has to be included in the syllabus. So if there are folks on your campus who maybe have some of those externally accredited programs, it may be a requirement for them to do that, and they could be good examples for other departments. So we have a question here about funding and time solving problems, and I'm not sure Amy's asking that question in the Q&A, and if you want to take a stab at answering, or maybe we need to ask her to kind of clarify the question.
I'm looking for the question right now to see what it says.
It's on the Q&A piece. Amy, I can tell you kind of where we're going with it. We don't have it streamlined yet, but annually we have tech plan requests. If there's something technology driven that you need for your program, because it may come from your department budget, your program budget, Perkins dollars, our own instructional replacement fund. So we already have this annual submission that anybody can submit a request for. I always say something you can kind of plug in, but it also includes a camera or, you know, some other things. And what we want them to start doing, if you did an assessment and found a deficiency, now you can tie that to that tech plan request. So we've always had them justify and explain the impact, and, you know, so that we can get the most bang for our dollars. So that is kind of a way that we're going with it, if that helps in terms of that kind of level.
Great. And Irina asks a question, and I'm just wondering if the link that you put in the chat might address this. She said, could you share your college-wide assessment terminology or language? For example, what counts as student learning outcomes, rubrics, et cetera. So maybe if you want to pop that link in the chat again, Jennifer, that would be helpful. And I know quite a few institutions who create a glossary for that, so that those terms are identified and defined for everyone on the campus to have that common language around assessment, which is a great idea. So thanks, Jennifer. Will they find that information on that website?
I think so, but I'm looking at it now and I don't know which link it is specifically. So
I do believe we have it in the instructions. Some of the original weave information on there. We do have them in the beginning of there. I'm fairly certain. Otherwise, shoot us an email. We have our emails on here. We would gladly share any information because we know this process is, we reached out to people especially when we were first starting. So we actually are part of a statewide assessment group now. The more the merrier when trying to figure all of this out. So feel free to give us a call or send us a message.
That's great. Thank you so much. And so they have shared their phone numbers as well as their email addresses that are on the slide here. And I'll leave that up for another minute in case people want to grab that. And also Jennifer popped those in the chat. So that's very helpful. And I will echo that. Recently been in some conversations with folks who are approaching accreditation events on their campus. And one of the best pieces of advice is go visit another campus of a similar size, a similar mission in your geographical area. Maybe somebody who's recently achieved their reaffirmation and kind of find out what's going on their campus and what you can learn from that. So that's a great piece of advice. We've got just a few closing items that we'll talk about here for a second. And while I'm talking through this, congratulations to you all for your successful HLC reaffirmation visits. And everybody should, if we could do applause, everybody should put applause in the chat for that, for all the great work that you guys were able to accomplish on your campus. So I do want to take just a minute for those on the call who maybe aren't familiar with Weave. We are a comprehensive assessment and accreditation platform. And if you don't currently have a tool, we would love to talk to you about our assessment and accreditation solutions. That includes curriculum mapping tool now. And so my information will be in the email that you'll receive with the recording of the webinar, and we would love to have a chat with you. I also want to mention Weave Academy. Weave Academy and our Weave Knowledge Center are available. Lots of free resources in our Knowledge Center, webinars just like this one that you can download on demand and review on your own time, as well as interactive professional development for those of you working in assessment and accreditation. We'll have another webinar to kick off the new year. Can't believe it's almost 2022, but starting in the new year, we'll be talking with New Jersey Institute of Technology and hearing about their assessment redesign. And then we have many events going forward into 2022, and you can scan that QR code right there to see what else is coming your ways. And with that, I will just say one more thank you so much, both to our guest speakers, Jennifer and Stacy. Thank you so much for partnering with us and for sharing some tips and tricks that folks can take back to their campus. And thanks to all of you for taking the time out on this almost the end of the work year. And please visit our Knowledge Center, and then keep in mind you'll see that survey pop up as soon as you close out of the webinar, and we would love to have your feedback on our webinar. And with that, I will say happy holidays to you all, and we'll see you in the new year.
Thanks, Sherry, and thanks everyone for being